Hi, this is your host Sapna Bhartiya, and we are here at Open Source Summit in Seattle. And we have with us once again Dirk Hohndel, Head of Open Source Program Office at Verizon. Dirk, it's great to have you back on the show after a long gap.
Yes, Swapnil, it's been a while since we talked.
So
Good to see
why?
you.
Yeah, good to see you as well. So why did we take such a gap? Tell us what you're doing.
Well, I changed jobs a couple of times and I've joined Verizon a year and a half ago. And as you said, I run the open source program office at Verizon. And it's been a very busy year and a half. It's a big company and learning the ropes, getting to know the people, figuring out what you're supposed to do and how you can actually create change, affect people. It's been a very busy time. And so that's why I haven't been on the speaking circuit as much, I guess.
So are you sticking to the letters V like VMware and then Verizon?
I did the letter I before, so no, it's coincidence. I typically say I like challenges and I like working in companies that have a scale that creates interesting problems and interesting opportunities. And so I really was looking for a role in a large enterprise. And with a global Fortune 50 company, I certainly achieved the large part. And there is just something about large companies that is really interesting when you're doing open source, because with the scale come interesting challenges, come interesting requirements, and comes a very different dynamic as far as changing the way things are done to the way you think things should be done. I'll try this again. There is an interesting dynamic trying to change the way things are done to the way you think things should be done. And there is just so much fun in doing that. So I really like that.
Right, because where you are in your career, and we have had a lot of discussions earlier also, you don't want easy job, you do want some, you also from a, where you go, I mean, I would not say in context of Verizon, you make an impact there to change either the culture or something. So when we look at Verizon, how mature they are when it comes to open source, what I'm asking you is how easy or difficult your job is there. Just give us a status of open source at Verizon.
I think large companies like this are all very, very complex and very different in different parts. And so we have a ton of extremely experienced engineers and very mature processes around open source end to end. So there is a lot that is going well. But as always, when you come in, obviously I come in with a lot of opinions and a lot of just my background of how I do things versus how a company that has been doing telco, if you look at the predecessor companies for 20, 30 plus years. I have many coworkers who've been there for 25, 35, 40, 45 years. There is a lot of institutional knowledge and institutional practices. And if you're trying to nudge those to something that is more modern, more aligned to the way we think about supply chains today, for example, there are fascinating, let's call them opportunities there to create change. And they're interesting problems to solve. One of the jokes that I always make is when you talk to people about their company and say, so how many data centers do you have in your company? And they say, oh, we are big. We have like 9 data centers. Yeah, we have about 65,000. Every cell tower is a data center, has a rack, has a bunch of servers, has software stacks running on it. And so if you look at the scale, a lot of the things that we think about in open source are like 2 orders of magnitude smaller in how they're approaching this. So there is a lot of really cool technology and a lot of really cool opportunity to do new things. And that's why I'm excited about my job.
What kind of changes, major changes are happening in these carriers, network operators, where they are leveraging a lot of software-defined networks, they are using a lot of open source, and how much open source are you seeing internally?
So that is an area that is a little harder for me to talk about because there is, of course, a lot of competitive and very company-specific detail here that I can't disclose. But what you need to think about is that in the telco space, everything is standards based. And especially in the 5G space, a lot of these things are open standards and are based on collaborative technologies. And so, on every step of the way, as a telco, you think about where are the things where the open software stack gives you what you need, and where are the things where you're almost required to build your own solutions that fit specifically to how your network is laid out, how you interact with your customers, how you're connecting the different services together. So there is this interesting balance between things that are open standards, open technologies, that are truly open source, and that are certainly your proprietary layer that ensures that you have the most reliable network in the nation. And that is, at the core of everything that we do. That is the first thought and the second thought and the third thought. How can we make sure we continue to have the most reliable network? And everything else then becomes a consequence of that. We don't lead with, oh, we want to do this in open source.
Yeah.
We lead with, we have the most reliable network.
Right. The reason I asked that question was to also understand, as a head of open source program office, what is your like we have talked about open source program offices before, but at Verizon, how different is it from different? Because they do a lot of open source, but as you rightly said, it's always a mix.
So it's very different. If you look at my last three major career stops, Intel, a hardware company, it's very easy. Any use of compute resources is good because it sells hardware, easy. VMware as a major software company before they were acquired by a great example of a company that scales through open source, that brings value through open source, that they expand then through their products. Verizon is very different because Verizon is all about that telco, the network experience. So they don't lead with a software experience or with selling hardware. They lead with selling a service, a connectivity service. And so open source is far less the core of what we do. It's far more a big part of how we do it. So the OSPO role at Verizon is, by the very nature of the company, far more inward facing, far more internal, ensuring that we find viable projects to use, that we stay in the leadership when it comes to security approaches, that we obviously follow all the compliance legal side. So there is a lot more focus on what we do internally and a lot less on engaging with creating new projects, all these things that I did in my last two roles. And in a way, that is the other part to the answer of your earlier question, why haven't we talked in a couple of years? Because so much more of what I do is engaging internally with the engineering teams, with the security teams, with the legal teams, with the network teams, and making sure that we do the best we can internally.
One more thing is that, did they already have an open source program office, or you came in to set up some, open source?
Ironically, the answer is both. So they had an open source program office, but through a number of reorgs and the divestiture of Yahoo, for a short while there actually wasn't one. So I was brought in and I created a new open source program office from scratch. But they've had a long history of open source engagement. They've been a Linux Foundation member. I say they, that's prior to me joining, but we as a technology company have been very engaged in open source for a long time.
More like they had a Schringer's OSPO. It was there and it was not there.
Yeah, but actually Schrödinger is a great example because if a company has an OSPO by what they do. Are they doing the right things? Are the right priorities in place? Are the right attitudes in place? And certainly they are. It's not like I came in to rescue someone. No, they have a very strong engineering culture, a very strong compliance culture. This is one of the things when you join Verizon that is integrity, regulations, rules. There's a very strong commitment to the credo of Verizon. You can look this up online. It's something we talk a lot about, the values that the company stands for. And they very much permeate into what I do. And it's actually it's a fun place to work. One of the things that fascinates me about Verizon is, as part of our credo, we say, if there is a catastrophe, if there is a disaster, we run towards it, not away from it. This fundamental belief that if things go wrong, whether it's a hurricane or a bridge coming down or whatever natural disaster happens, the fires in Lahaina, any such thing, the first instinct of Verizon is that we need to send people there. We need to ensure that people have cell connectivity because the first responders rely on that. We have power trucks, lightning trucks, all these things to help people in a disaster, and that is a core of the corporate culture. And as a human being, there are often things where you say, yeah, I'm kind of part of my company. This is something where I get goosebumps talking about it. This is something that truly excites me, that my company very honestly and verifiably, every time things go wrong, we run there, we help. And that's awesome. It's a great place to be.
I mean, I would not even expect you to work at a company where you don't feel passionate about. So that is pretty obvious. Now I want to go back to our old discussion that we used to have about open source in general. Yesterday there was a project announced here, Valky,
Yes.
which is last year Linux Foundation announced Open Tofu, which is kind of it's not Linux Foundations. I talked to Mike Dolan this morning also. It was like we are still doing the same thing. We bring people together when there is we always build communities around. They solve their own problem. We just provide. But what I want to ask is that if you look at some of these cases, we had long discussion in our previous shows earlier. Are these changes look disturbing to you, or you're like, these keep happening, we'll keep solving? Or like, no, this is something disturbing where companies are changing licenses altogether.
So Swapnil, we've talked about this quite a bit a couple of years ago. I think this is a very natural consequence of projects that are dominated by a single company that is VC funded or just has gone public, where the financial pressure suddenly the management thinks they are forced into making drastic changes. And very often, I think, strategically in the long run, these changes don't pan out. These changes that do not translate into huge success. They very often translate into you're creating a competitor for yourself. And if you come from a permissively licensed project, a BSD3 licensed project, and for years your public statements are, this is BSD3 license, it will never change. And then you say, oops, never mind, it's now licensed under 2 licenses that are definitely not open source, that are very much shared source available licenses. And if you don't expect the community of tens of thousands of people who use the BSD version of that project as part of their dependencies, if you don't expect that these people will turn around and say, well, okay, we'll do it ourselves. There is so much momentum around Valky, around the key value technology that is at the core of this software stack, that it was, to me, totally obvious that this would get forked and we would get a new project. And I'm actually super excited that the Linux Foundation within 8 days came out and said, and here is the new name and here is the new home. And we as a foundation, and you know that I'm a huge Linux Foundation fan, we as a foundation will stand behind it. And that's why I'm quoted in the announcement this week, because to me that is the strength of open source. If you decide, the company behind the project decides we want to change the license, that's within your rights. That's how this business works. We will continue to see this all the time. But it's within our rights as the community of users and contributors and other tech companies in this space. It's within our rights to say, well, we do our own. And I am 100% certain that Valky will be a huge success, just like OpenTofu is a huge success. And that the idea that the community harvested and brought together by the Linux Foundation can absolutely sustain these projects and be extremely successful we will see this play out once again.
We have seen past also when things happen, there were forks made, but most of the forks were not successful because they're not backed by a larger community. But with these two forks, is it also kind of sending a message that you're trying to solve a business problem with the licensing solution is not going to work? Or you feel that no, these things will keep happening?
You're quoting old conversations of ours. Yes, a license is not a business model. And that is a constant misunderstanding a lot of VC funded companies have, where they think that their business has to be driven by the license. And when you talk to, for example, the folks at Percona, I know you talked to Anne earlier, for them, this fundamental idea of we provide services on software that isn't ours, but software that is for the community, by the community, and we then make that more successful for a commercial user. That is at the core of how business around open source should work, and how it works very well for a lot of companies. And Red Hat did a $34 billion exit on a basis of everything that they did until then was open source. And so it's not that you need to suddenly close things down in order to be successful. That's not true. And I really hope that this sends a message. I really hope that a lot more of the VC funded companies ask themselves, is this really what I want to do? Do I really want to risk that my community that I have suddenly splits? And am I certain that I'm going to keep the larger part of the community, or are over the next 2 years the majority of the users going to migrate away? And what we will see, if you look at things like all the CNCF projects, they will all migrate to Valkey. So Valkey will become the standard in this space. And that is certainly not what the company had in mind.
So the short answer is that yes, it will send a very strong message, and we do need to send out a message. I mean, we have nothing against HashiCorp, but it's more about, as we discussed earlier. Don't bait and switch. Just go with the license. I mean, we had some very great discussions back there. So when you say that we are quoting back, the fault lies in you. We had great discussions. So I have to now, since we are talking about open source, I also want to talk about the changed geopolitical world we live in. Linux Foundation also did last year. Open Congress was there, and I did a survey around. Do you see that when we look at the whole geopolitical situation, techno nationalism is growing, where you feel that open source may become a global language to write software, so that countries don't have to worry about being locked out just because there is a political conflict?
So I always think that mixing technology and politics is very dangerous, and it's fraught with problems because there are so many good intentions, and there are so many people who strongly believe in their cause and who think that they have to make a statement for this side or for that side in the conflict, whereas this is all about human suffering. And to me, what strikes me the most about whether it's the Palestine situation or the Ukraine situation, it's not who is right, who is wrong. It's people are suffering, people are dying, people are losing their livelihoods. Young people are losing their youth, are losing their parents, are losing their homes. It's the suffering that is the problem for me. And I feel bad talking about technology and open source when this feels like a so much bigger problem in the world, and something that is so much more important than whether you use the BSD or the GPL. But to honor your question, I think open source software continues to be the fundamental backbone of how technology works these days. It is nearly impossible to build a product without having open source inside. It's much easier to build a product with nothing proprietary inside. And so the fact that software that is available under an open source license is by definition available to anyone in the world is obviously a creating a level playing field, and it is a leveler across all of these conflicts. But I would never want to make this the topic of what I want to talk about when these conflicts are about suffering and about human beings and not about abstract concepts like software.
When we look at LLMs, Gen AI, is it a hype, or you see it's a transformative technology at the scale of Linux kernel?
So, as a good mathematician, I will say yes, because it's both. There is a ridiculous amount of hype in that space, obviously. There is so much completely unfounded and unrealizable statements being made about AI. And no, this is not intelligence, this is autocorrect on steroids. But there is really, really useful and interesting and transformative technology in here. If you look at the way this can make your life easier, everyone loves to talk about, oh, this is going to replace programmers, it's going to replace journalists, when in reality, it's a tool that can make that work better, easier, faster. It can help you with editing, it can help you with these simple repetitive tasks. If you need to remember how to do a CSS selector, the LLM can do this for you. So to me, the not so shiny, not so hypey part of this technology is the one that's interesting in how it helps knowledge workers like journalists, like technologists, to be better at their job and to more quickly get to results. And that's where I think this is a transformative technology. And all of these things, of course, are being done with open source models. And so there is, the arch back to what we were talking about. A ton of the underlying technologies are open source, and that's good. So much of this is then driven by the data, and that's where we need to talk about open source data, open data. What does that mean? How do you defend data against people who just want to steal it, just want to take it from you? There is a lot of interesting topics beyond that. But at the end of the day, it's another open source revolution.
You had a discussion with Linus also. Tell us the highlight, which was, because you always hit him somewhere. So anything that was like really of your interest also?
I think this morning we talked about a lot of topics around security, obviously the XZ exploit, about the hardware bugs and their impact on security. And I think the big thing that came out of this was technology optimism. That with all the challenges, whether it's on the security side, on the AI hype side, there is so much interesting technology that is being developed and so much progress that we're making that I think that was the core message of our conversation.
Dirk, once again, thank you so much, for sitting down. And as usual, it's always great to talk to you. And thanks for your time today. And I look forward to the next discussion. Thank you.
Thank you for having me. I really enjoyed the conversation.